London, December 1952. The city was braced for winter, accustomed to its biting cold and the familiar, damp embrace of a creeping fog. Early December mornings often carried the scent of coal smoke, a comfort against the chill, a staple of every home and factory. But this particular winter, something was different. An unseen force was gathering. A unique confluence of circumstances was about to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary, and the familiar into the utterly terrifying. The air itself, usually a simple medium for life, would become a weapon. What if the very air you breathed turned against you, slowly, silently, invisibly? This was not merely a natural phenomenon, not simply another pea-soup fog Londoners knew so well. This was an engineered catastrophe, built by human activity and amplified by nature's caprice. A period of unusually cold weather had settled over the city, driving residents to consume vast quantities of coal for warmth. Meanwhile, a powerful anticyclone lingered, locking the atmosphere in place. The wind, London's natural cleanser, vanished. Conditions were ripe for disaster. The stage was set. With temperatures dropping, the demand for heating skyrocketed. Homes, factories, power stations across London burned coal, releasing an unprecedented volume of airborne pollutants into the static air. These were not just harmless particles, they were a cocktail of industrial and domestic emissions, heavy with sulfur. Unable to disperse, trapped by the anticyclone and the lack of wind, these pollutants began to accumulate. A silent, invisible buildup that would soon manifest as something far more sinister, far more deadly. The city unknowingly brewed its own poison. Then, it began. Friday, December 5, 1952. What started as a typical, if heavy, fog soon transformed. A thick layer descended, enveloping London in an opaque shroud. But this was no ordinary mist. It was dense, unyielding, and carried a peculiar, acrid smell. Residents, initially unfazed, quickly realized this was different. Visibility plummeted. The familiar sounds of the city began to fade, muffled by the encroaching blanket. A sense of unease, a quiet apprehension, started to settle over the capital. The city was being swallowed. The fog grew thicker, evolving from a typical grey to an unsettling, yellowish hue. This was a color of warning, a visible manifestation of the toxic cocktail brewing within. It wasn't just hiding the world, it was fundamentally changing it. The air became heavy, a tangible presence. Breathing grew difficult, the lungs protesting with each shallow gasp. What was causing this bizarre, suffocating density? What hidden elements made this smog so uniquely oppressive? The city, paralyzed and disoriented, stumbled through its first day under the spell of this eerie, unnatural phenomenon. London came to a near standstill. The streets, usually bustling arteries of activity, became treacherous paths. Drivers, unable to see just a few feet in front of them, abandoned their vehicles. Public transportation ground to a halt. Buses crept along, guided by conductors walking ahead with flares, or simply stopped altogether. Taxis became useless. Railways were disrupted. Even river traffic on the Thames ceased. The city, accustomed to movement, was now frozen, a silent, ghostly landscape where familiar landmarks vanished into the yellow abyss. Normal life, a rhythm established over centuries, was profoundly disrupted. Outdoor events, a casual pleasure for many, became impossible. Soccer matches, a cherished pastime, were cancelled. The vibrant hum of the metropolis was replaced by an eerie quiet, punctuated only by the coughs and gasps of its inhabitants. What was happening to the very fabric of daily existence? How long could a major world capital sustain such an profound interruption? And what invisible toll was this taken on the human body, on the very breath of its people? As the smog persisted through Saturday and into Sunday, December 6th and 7th, its true, insidious nature began to emerge. This wasn't just inconvenient, it was lethal. People, especially the elderly and those with pre-existing respiratory conditions, began to fall ill. The air, heavy with pollutants, attacked the lungs. Hospitals, initially dealing with respiratory complaints, soon saw a disturbing surge in fatalities. But the sheer scale of the disaster, the true toxicity of the air, remained obscured, just like the city itself. A silent killer was at work. At the time, the full extent of the air's toxicity was not understood. Londoners were used to smog, a part of the urban landscape for centuries. But this was different. The concentration of pollutants, especially from the sulfur-rich coal, had created a unique chemical environment. What secret ingredient made this smog so profoundly deadly? It would take decades for scientists to fully unravel the mystery, revealing a devastating truth about what exactly was suspended in that yellow cloud, attacking every living breath. The air contained a hidden enemy. Each passing hour saw the smog deepen, becoming an almost impenetrable wall. Inside homes, the fumes seeped through cracks, leaving a film of grime. Visibility indoors was even affected, as if the very walls of London were weeping soot. The city became a claustrophobic cage, the outside world a blurred, yellow void. Children were kept indoors, their play confined, their world shrunk. Panic, though muted, began to ripple through the population. When would this nightmare end? Would the sun ever pierce through again? The answer was not yet in sight. 5 long days, from Friday, December 5th, to Tuesday, December 9th, London remained gripped. The relentless cold ensured continued coal burning, constantly replenishing the toxic cloud. The anticyclone held it hostage. Londoners were trapped, vulnerable, breathing the very air that sickened and killed them. The normal rhythms of society had ceased. What happens when a modern city, one of the world's most vibrant, is rendered helpless by the very air it breathes? The answers were grim, and still unfolding in silent, agonizing breaths. What exactly was making this smog so lethal? While the immediate cause was clear, combustion of sulfur-rich coal under specific weather conditions, the precise chemical mechanism for the sudden spike in deaths remained an enigma for decades. The Great Smog was so thick, so poisonous, it became a phenomenon studied and debated by scientists worldwide. They understood the ingredients: cold, coal, and stillness. But how these elements conspired to create such a potent, deadly brew was a mystery that deepened with every passing year. A puzzle with a devastating human cost. The human body, remarkably resilient, found itself overwhelmed. Respiratory tract infections soared. The sulfuric acid, a key component whose presence was later confirmed, ravaged lungs and airways. What began as minor irritation quickly escalated to severe illness, pneumonia, and ultimately, death. This was not a quick, dramatic end, but often a slow, agonizing struggle for breath. The insidious nature of the smog meant that many victims suffered for days, or even weeks, before succumbing. The true toll was quietly mounting, unseen by the wider world. As the weekend drew to a close, the shocking reality of the smog's impact began to surface. Emergency services were stretched, doctors overworked. The initial reports hinted at elevated death rates, but the true scope was yet to be consolidated. Families grieved in isolation, their loved ones taken by an invisible enemy that hung in the air. This was no ordinary winter flu season. This was something unprecedented, something that transcended the normal bounds of urban living. A horrifying truth was slowly, grimly, taking shape across London. Monday, December 8th. The smog showed no signs of abating. For many, hope began to wane. The city had endured centuries of fogs, but never one so pervasive, so suffocating, so utterly lethal. The very act of stepping outside felt like a gamble. The darkness was profound, even in midday. Streetlights burned uselessly, piercing only a few feet into the yellow gloom. This was London's darkest hour, a time when a bustling metropolis became a silent, poisoned tomb, and the future seemed as obscured as the city itself. What could break this stranglehold? The true horror lay in its invisibility, its insidious nature. Unlike a flood or a fire, the enemy was the air itself. People didn't realize how toxic the air truly was because they were accustomed to smog. They breathed it in, unaware of the damage it wrought with every inhale. This blind trust in the everyday, this complacency born of familiarity, compounded the tragedy. The Great Smog was not an explosion, but a slow, suffocating embrace from which escape seemed impossible. The world watched, perhaps, but did it truly comprehend? The collective suffering of London was immense. The city that had endured the Blitz, that had weathered countless challenges, now found itself brought to its knees by something almost ethereal. Businesses shuttered, schools closed. The social fabric frayed under the strain. What does it mean for a society when its most basic need, the very air it breathes, becomes its greatest threat? The silence of the city, broken only by the sounds of illness, was a testament to its profound agony. The answers to its suffering lay not in defense, but in the wind. The Great Smog didn't just kill, it decimated. Initial estimates were grim enough, but the true impact was far more devastating. Over the course of those 5 days, and in the subsequent months, the total death toll would reach staggering figures. These weren't just statistics, they were lives, families, futures, all extinguished by a preventable disaster. How could a city simply lose so many to the air? The answer would compel a global reckoning, but first, London had to emerge from its toxic prison. The immediate impact of the Great Smog was horrific. As the crisis reached its peak, it claimed lives with relentless efficiency. Thousands succumbed within the first few days, primarily from severe respiratory complications. This was not a slow-burn crisis in its initial phase, it was an acute, deadly assault on the population. The city was burying its dead even as the smog still choked its streets. A profound tragedy, unfolding in real time, minute by agonizing minute. But this was only the beginning of the accounting. In the immediate aftermath of the smog, the numbers began to coalesce into a chilling picture. While precise figures are always debated in such crises, early assessments pointed to a truly catastrophic loss. More than 4,000 people lost their lives in the span of those initial 5 days. A shocking number, an unimaginable toll. These were the immediate casualties, the first victims of a city's poisoned air. But the story, and the death count, did not end there. The smog's shadow lingered far beyond its physical presence. Then, just as despair threatened to consume the city entirely, a change. Tuesday, December 9th, 1952. After 5 unrelenting days, the meteorological conditions shifted. The stubborn anticyclone finally moved. A faint breeze, a whisper of wind, began to stir through the stagnant air. A distant glimmer of light appeared in the oppressive yellow. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The prison doors of smog were beginning to creak open, offering a hint of liberation. London held its breath, hoping for salvation. The wind gained strength, gathering momentum. And then, a cleansing rain. The combination was exactly what London desperately needed. A brisk wind from the west swept through the city, pushing the toxic cloud away, out over the North Sea. The rain followed, washing away the greasy black streaks left behind on buildings and trees, on streets and windowsills. Slowly, painstakingly, the city began to re-emerge from its suffocating shroud. Buildings, once swallowed, reappeared. The horizon, long lost, became visible once more. The nightmare was lifting. Londoners, cautiously venturing outside, took their first grateful gasps of fresh air in days. The sensation must have been overwhelming, the simple act of breathing, transformed from a struggle into a profound relief. The streets, though still slick and grimy, were navigable. The sounds of the city, muted for so long, began to return. Life slowly, tentatively, resumed. But the scars of those 5 days ran deep, not just on the city's infrastructure, but in the collective psyche of its people. The world had witnessed a new kind of terror. Even after the smog had physically dispersed, its shadow lingered. The health effects were long-lasting. Many who survived the initial onslaught suffered from chronic respiratory issues for years to come. The Great Smog was not an isolated incident that merely ended when the wind blew. Its impact continued to ripple through families and communities, a stark reminder of the air's power to both sustain and destroy. The true scale of the disaster was still being calculated, a grim arithmetic of loss and suffering that shocked the nation. The more thorough studies, conducted in the months and years that followed, revealed an even more harrowing picture. The Great Smog of London was not just a 5-day event, it was a humanitarian disaster that left an indelible mark. While 4,000 perished immediately, another 8,000 deaths were attributed to the smog in the subsequent weeks and months, mostly from respiratory tract infections. The total death toll, a chilling testament to the air's toxicity, stood at an unthinkable number. A city, unknowingly, had poisoned its own. The Great Smog of London was more than just a tragedy, it was a profound awakening. It shook London, and indeed the rest of the world, to its core. The sheer lethality of the event, the undeniable link between industrial pollution and public health, could no longer be ignored. Something drastic needed to change. This was not a localized problem, but a universal warning. The disaster served as a stark, undeniable catalyst for a new era of environmental awareness and policy. The air pollution crisis was finally impossible to deny. Within about 4 years after the smog, the United Kingdom took decisive action. The Clean Air Act of 1956 was passed, a landmark piece of legislation directly spurred by the Great Smog. This act began the process of cleaning up the issues that had plagued London for centuries. It introduced smoke control areas, where burning coal in open fires was restricted, and promoted cleaner fuels. It mandated taller chimneys for industrial emissions, to disperse pollutants higher into the atmosphere. This was a direct response, a tangible promise that such a disaster would never happen again. The lessons learned from the Great Smog of London transcended national borders. It led to major clean air laws that reshaped modern cities forever. Urban planning began to incorporate environmental considerations, recognizing the profound impact of air quality on public health and livability. The very design of industrial zones, the regulation of emissions, and the promotion of sustainable energy sources all found their roots in this terrible event. London's suffering became a blueprint for global change, a warning etched into the collective memory of humanity. Even with the Clean Air Act in place, the precise chemical mechanism behind the Great Smog's extreme lethality remained a mystery for almost 65 years. In 2016, a study finally revealed the answer: high levels of sulfuric acid. The sulfur dioxide from coal burning interacted with nitrogen dioxide, also from combustion, and water droplets in the natural fog. This created sulfuric acid droplets, which became concentrated in the windless conditions. The fog itself acted as a chemical reactor, creating the deadly acid that ravaged London's lungs. A long-held puzzle finally complete. The Great Smog was not an isolated incident in London's long battle with air pollution. For hundreds of years, as the city grew into a modern, industrial powerhouse, its air quality deteriorated. The 18th and 19th centuries saw a significant worsening, with P. Supus becoming commonplace. Like the Great Stink of the Thames in 1858, the Great Smog of 1952 was an exceptionally bad event that served as a turning point, making the intolerable finally impossible to ignore. A city's history, quite literally, shrouded in smoke. The Great Smog of London stands as a monumental cautionary tale. It taught the world that air pollution is not merely an aesthetic nuisance, but a direct threat to life itself. It demonstrated the profound interconnectedness of human activity, weather patterns, and public health. But have the lessons truly been absorbed? A recent triggering of the London Emergency Air Quality Alert, and studies finding dangerous levels of toxic air particles today, suggest that perhaps the memory of those 5 days may be fading. History, as always, offers its warnings. The Great Smog of London woke the world to the dangers of coal. It prompted a change in how the world saw air pollution, shifting it from an inevitable consequence of industry to a public health crisis demanding urgent action. It spurred landmark environmental protections, influencing legislation far beyond the UK. This singular, horrific event forged a new understanding of our responsibility to the air we share, compelling governments and industries to confront the environmental consequences of progress. The world could no longer pretend it didn't see. The Great Smog's legacy is immense. From the implementation of clean air zones in major cities, like London's own ultra-low emission zone, to global efforts to reduce emissions and transition to renewable energy, its echoes are felt everywhere. It cemented the principle that environmental protection is a vital component of urban planning and public health. The image of London, suffocated by its own industry, remains a powerful symbol of what happens when we fail to respect the delicate balance of our planet. A stark reminder, still relevant today. For 5 days in December 1952, London was swallowed by a yellow fog that didn't just hide the world, it took it away. It paralyzed the city, crippled transportation, and silently claimed thousands of lives. The Great Smog of London was undoubtedly the worst air pollution crisis the city had ever faced, a phenomenon born of cold, coal, and a cruel twist of weather. It was a terrifying glimpse into a future of unchecked pollution, a future that London, and eventually the world, chose to avert. The Great Smog of 1952 was a phenomenon that changed the course of urban environmental policy forever. It was a stark demonstration of how vulnerable modern cities are to environmental catastrophe, especially when human activity combines with natural conditions in a deadly embrace. For a brief, terrifying period, one of the world's greatest cities vanished beneath a toxic haze, a silent, suffocating horror. It was a crisis that forced humanity to open its eyes, to confront its impact, and to begin the long, difficult journey towards cleaner air. The city had vanished, but its lessons remained. The 1952 Great Smog of London stands as a pivotal turning point in human history, a moment when the unseen dangers of industrialization became devastatingly, undeniably clear. It was a wake-up call, not just for London, but for every industrialized nation grappling with the environmental cost of progress. Those 5 days in December 1952, born of cold, coal, and a chilling meteorological trap, transformed the global conversation about air pollution, setting in motion a movement for cleaner, healthier urban environments that continues to this day. The Great Smog revealed the hidden price of progress, the unintended consequences of rapid industrialization and unchecked energy consumption. It underscored the fact that our environment is not limitless, and its capacity to absorb our waste is finite. What price are we truly willing to pay for convenience, for warmth, for power? London paid a heavy one, measured in thousands of lives and a scarred collective memory. It was a lesson hard learned, etched in the grey grime and yellow haze of a brutal December week. And a lesson we must never forget. Even today, the battle against air pollution continues globally. From smog alerts in modern megacities to ongoing debates about carbon emissions and climate change, the spirit of the Great Smog's lessons persists. London itself is fighting toxic air, and in many ways, winning, with initiatives like the world's largest clean air zone. The story of those 5 deadly days in December 1952 is a reminder that constant vigilance, scientific understanding, and decisive policy action are crucial for protecting public health and the planet. The fight for clean air is far from over. The Great Smog of London, 5 days that gripped a city, claimed thousands of lives, and changed the world. It taught us that the air we breathe is not an empty space, but a vital, fragile system susceptible to human impact. It showed us the profound consequences of neglecting our environment. And it became a solemn promise: never again. The story of those dark December days in 1952 is a testament to humanity's capacity for both catastrophic oversight and powerful, transformative change. A somber warning, and a hopeful legacy.